Welcome back to Modern Mondays here at Guardian Games from Portland, Oregon. We're Portland Paper. I'm Travis, hanging out here with Ian, and we're in round number 2 of 4 here at our tournament. And, I feel a little bit like the Wicked Witch in Snow White, because
Why do you feel that way,
I'm
Travis?
looking in the mirror, and mirror, mirror on the wall. Maybe that's the thing,
Oh,
right?
yes,
Yeah.
because
We're watching a mirror here. We're seeing hardened scales versus hardened scales. And so the requisite, which deck do you think is favored in this matchup question?
well, first I want to note that I'm very happy that Kiernan's name fit in the name slot that I'd made for the graphic.
Oh,
Uh,
you could even have a couple extra letters there. It looks like you might be able to squeeze in.
yes, yeah. So we're set up for some long names, maybe not hyphenated last names.
Okay.
Those will get you. Uh,
uh,
as far as this mirror is concerned, I myself have not played it. I imagine that Walking Ballista is quite a good card in this mirror, as the deck is kind of looking to use things like Steel Overseer to kind of get its threats out of reach, and the first person with a Walking Ballista who can manage the board, I think, may be able to run away with the game.
well, so I've been keeping up with my deck list lately, and Steel Overseer has bit the dust. It's not in the popular Hardened Scales decks anymore.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, chat.
I mean, it could still very well be in these decks, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but the most recent Hardened Scales decks and the ones that were played at the Pro Tour are not playing Steel Overseer.
So it's not a hardened scales rule either.
Oh. Uh, uh, if we're
That's
going to weigh it out on the scales here, um, I don't know where we're going with this.
all right. Well, the players have saved us by starting the match.
We get a Llanowar Reborn that's going to have a Graft ability and get a counter on it, and a Mox Opal. Looks like both players starting with a Mox Opal, but Eric might be able to use his first. You know what I really like? I like Kiernan's actual counters instead of using dice, because like literally you're putting counters on a thing, and it's just so much more flavorful than using dice with numbers.
And isn't that more true to like the old school with how Magic was played? Wasn't it originally counters like that?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I know that I had some for Pokemon that I was just absolutely in love with. Little blue and yellow energy tokens.
Get an animation module here, and looks like Kiernan is going to ping that Arcbound worker on Eric's side before it can move the counters around anywhere. Oh, it looks like we're a little bit stuck on lands there for Eric.
Yeah, the Naked Mox Opal. It needs its friends to be able to do anything. So
So Inkmoth is a very strong card in the mirror. Usually, if you can play around Dismember, which is sometimes a 1 or 2 of in the main deck, that is going to be a reliable kill if the board gets really cluttered, because there aren't a lot of flying creatures in Hardened Scales, and Inkmoth or Blinkmoth with a bunch of counters dumped on them usually will be able to win the game.
you know my other favorite thing about matchups for decks like this? I don't have to worry about fetches and all sorts of random life total swings that are hidden.
uh,
It's all out in the open. No damage off your lands.
Sometimes they play Horizon Canopy.
All right, fair enough.
Coming in for 1.
So Kiernan kind of going wide on the board so far. And like you said, he is representing quite a few counters on that Inkmoth Nexus, should he so choose to go all in on that route.
So there's no real reason to at this point, because Eric literally doesn't have anything on the board, but could be holding a Dismember, so then you're max punished for that move.
It might make the game a little closer if both of those things happened. Yeah, you got to feel for Eric. keeping a hand with one land and an opal, hoping to get there, and just kind of floundering at this point.
These Hardened Skills decks do not turn on the Metalcraft from Mox Opal nearly as quickly as traditional Affinity does, where that usually is able to be tapped for mana on turn 1. Hardened Scales, you're lucky if it happens turn 2, but usually by turn 3 you're going to get there.
Kiernan dropping a Metallic Mimic. So is Mimic the card that has replaced Steel Overseer
It
then?
is, definitely. That is the swap for the Steel Overseer.
Seems fairly clean, I imagine.
We're able to name a creature type, depending on what you have out, like animation module. Maybe you have a pumped up. What is a creature? Hangerback Walker. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe you have a pumped up Hangerback Walker that you're going to be able to sack and just want to choose Sopter.
Right. It seems certainly a weaker choice in the long game than Steel Overseer, but probably better to get value out of it faster.
Yes, if you double spell on a single turn by playing Metallic Mimic and something else, you're at least going to get something out of it.
Right. Yeah, the current climate, having Steel Overseer make it a full turn cycle to untap does seem maybe a little rough. I wonder if this will move to Legacy Steel Stompy, which is a big fan of Steel Overseer currently.
I haven't seen List recently. It seems like that was very, very popular for a while, but then it's kind of died down a little bit. Seems like goblins are the flavor of Goblins or Eldrazi are the flavor of Stompy these days.
Certainly. Merfolk maybe having a bit of a resurgence, but
it's
neither here nor there.
Oh.
Players sideboarding here. First off, what cards are bad, actively bad in this matchup? What are players looking to remove from their decks?
That is a good question. I think you are probably going to want to board in Dismembers and Nature's Claims. Maybe just Nature's Claims. Cards, you have some... The Arcbound Worker doesn't really do that much. Just a 1/1 with modular. Seems like a pretty free card to board out.
Right, just kind of there as filler.
I think you want all your creatures to be pretty high impact because you're going to end up with large board stalls, and 1/1 isn't going to do much.
Certainly.
Any obvious cards that you see being able to be sideboarded out?
I swear, I did have a
nothing sticks out to me. I completely agree with you that Worker seems like the most medium card. If either of the players is playing a Throne of Geth, I might board that out. But I like the rest. And I imagine that you would stay at 20 lands. I don't think this is a matchup where you'd want to drop any lands.
So maybe you just drop the Worker and then side in all those Nature's Claims? Nature's Claims also can act as a way to destroy your own Hangerback Walker if you don't have a sack outlet as well.
Right. Spellskite also seems potentially awesome.
Spellskite is great with modular triggers. That is something I overlooked. So perhaps boarding out some Workers, Throne of Death if it's in there. Bringing in some claims. And
possibly maybe a Metallic Mimic if you're... It doesn't seem super high priority. It doesn't seem near as good as Walking Ballista, and in a board stall it's going to get pinged down so fast that I think I'd want something maybe a little more robust.
It looks like Eric kept in the Workers and is leading off with a Darksteel Citadel into a Worker. Interestingly enough, if Eric had had a Mox, it would have been turned on. It's kind of a rare occurrence on turn 1 for this deck.
Yeah, it is somewhat uncommon.
And we're going to go to 19 here off the green mana from that Horizon's Canopy and see what this cantrip's going to find us.
Both feel like somewhat medium openers for what this deck's capable of. Kiernan doing a little bit of sculpting, Eric kind of dropping the, like we were saying, very so-so one drop.
Well, Eric able to hit the green mana this game at least. And what 2-drop are we going to have? Oh, we got the Spellskite. That's going to be an issue.
Does Kieran have the answer? Or if you're Kieran, are you more interested in just kind of developing your board? Obviously, he picked up that Opal last turn, probably hoping to turn it on.
Yeah, it feels like Eric doesn't have any flying threats, so as long as you can just develop your board here, you'll eventually draw a removal spell. One would hope, if it doesn't already exist in Kiernan's hand. So what 2-drop are we going to get on Kiernan's side of the table? It looks like it's a Hangerback Walker.
I love getting Hangerback out here early. Turns on Metalcraft for the Opal and the Stirrings.
Another Stirrings there.
And critically, Hangerback Walker is not a card that is all affected by Spellskite. So Kiernan will be able to sit over there and keep growing it as fodder for a Ravager or counters to eventually transfer to a Ballista. Although at that point the Spellskite would be a problem.
Oh boy, we got an invention here.
So that is a Ravager.
Okay.
Arcbound Ravager.
I will say that is a weakness I have on the commentary side of things, is being able to identify all the Masterpiece series cards.
So the evolution of Arcbound Ravager, we go from early Ravager,
That guy looks like it's going to really mess some things up.
yeah, to Masters Ravager, which looks much bigger to me,
It's kind of a little bit
scale-wise,
more cartoony to me, as I'm not quite as afraid of that.
to Inventions Ravager.
That looks like the dogs from Black Mirror.
Yeah,
I'm still a fan of the original, I think.
as am I. But to each their own.
Not much has happened.
Looks
Kieran
like we may
playing a
have
land
missed
and
or the worker coming in for one.
a
And we see
4-drop
Ballista
here.
on 2.
Go ahead. End your turn.
We'll see a dismember. Eric is thinking about firing it off. And are we going to commit?
5 life. So dismember.
So we're going to pay 4 more life for the Phyrexian cost.
So, if you're Kiernan, what are you looking to shoot here?
Probably
I think you go after the Ravager.
shoot the Ravager, yeah.
Yeah. And then you force Eric, if he wants to save it, he's going to have to respond by ultimately sacking 2 artifacts.
Or just paying some life.
Yes. Looks like he chooses to go upstairs.
I go.
Yeah, I don't like that play, because I'd want to make my opponent cast or use Spellskite and pay Phyrexian life, Phyrexian mana and pay life to redirect, or get some creatures off the battlefield.
Yep.
Agreed. I think this matchup is all about what's on board. And I think because the resources due to Ravager and Hardened Scales can sometimes be multiplicative, I think it's important to manage that.
Post combat. Walking ballista. On 1.
So we see the Ballista on the other side. If you're Eric, I was going to say, would you have shot the Hangerback Walker there?
I would not have, because I think just the Ballista being on the battlefield is going to matter. Maybe more than the Hangerback potentially pumping up for 1.
He still will have the option to shoot it as well, and he could do it in response to Kiernan adding a counter, so is not sacrificing too much by waiting if that is in fact what he wants to do.
Nature's Claim, Walking Ballista.
All right, we're going to get a Nature's Claim on the Walking Ballista.
Pay 2 life to retarget it to spell sky.
And Eric is going to pay 2 life to change the target to Spellskite.
I go to 11. And I'll gain 4 life.
Okay.
Going to 15.
So it looks like we must have missed some life there. So if you are Eric, once you've redirected, would you have sacked to the Ravager? The Spellskite rules get me sometimes. I
You have
forget.
it.
Does it have to be a valid
It
target
does, yeah.
at the time the spell resolves, or just at the time the redirection happens?
I'm curious. I actually that's a judge call that I'd have to read some text on.
Ooh, chat. Anybody in chat want to weigh in on this
Walking Ballista on 3.
complex and interesting Magic the Gathering question?
I guess it's on the stack.
I'm not going to do anything before.
Okay.
All right, we get a Ballista on 3 from Kieran here
Before it's
after
play.
floating some mana, sacrificing an opal when a new one is played.
Worker, modular onto here.
So Eric decides that now's the time to pump his own Ballista.
Go ahead.
I do. So Eric's sitting with the sack outlet here. Kiernan's sitting with the hangerback walker that can grow each turn.
Which Hangerback has not been growing. It's just been hanging out.
Right. Kiernan does have the perfect amount of mana if he's not playing anything else to turns in the future be doing both. Hardened Skills seems fantastic here.
Can you see how many counters are hanging out on that Ravager?
I cannot.
Shoot your Walking Ballista for 2.
In response, I'll
Kiernan points 2 damage at the Ballista. Eric responds by pointing 1 at Kiernan's Ballista.
I'll sacrifice it to the Ravager.
And sacks to the Ravager. And Kiernan will ping Eric for 1. So all this results in a pumped Ravager.
Oh boy, that was a lot of shortcutting that just happened there, and I feel like those players may have wanted to slow everything down and actually put the different abilities on the stack.
I think you missed that.
Oh.
Rising Canopy.
My bad. Walking Ballista.
And Eric has the backup Ballista.
So if a Ballista has taken damage, you can't
To the Ravager.
remove counters past the amount of damage it's taken, because then it would be dead. So I think by Kieran just saying shoot it for 2, sort of I shortcutted saying, hey, I'm going to do this and put these both on the stack, which allowed Eric to make the better play.
Right. Right, one of those corner cases where shortcutting can come back to bite you. I guess they're not even corner cases. Quite a few cases where shortcutting can come back to bite you a little bit.
Yeah, there's important reasons to shortcut in certain situations, but this is not one of those.
Alright, sack Rising Canopy to draw a card.
And Kieran's going to see if we can get a better card.
Digging a little deeper, mana's not really his problem right now.
And Worker's not quite the payoff card you're really looking for. For being called Hardened Skills, neither of these decks saw a Hardened Skills until last turn in 2 games.
Right, yeah, definitely a little bit slow getting that on the board here.
Move to combat.
Look like we're just rumbling into the Ravager.
Just the Ravager.
Yep. Should be able to find out how big it is shortly. It's not bigger than 1d6. Can tell you that much.
Thinking about some blocks. Gonna block with the Thopter.
And it always feels sad to let an artifact go in this deck without having some sort of effect attached to it.
Oh, it looks like Eric is still playing the Steel Overseers. So Kieran falling pretty far behind here. So a couple must deal with threats on Eric's side of the board.
Yeah, Eric actually has just the ideal mix on his board right now. Ballista to manage the board, Steel Overseer as an engine, and Ravager kind of as a like kind of valve to sack artifacts should they get targeted individually.
So when there's a Hardened Scales out, your Ravager is going to be a lot better than your opponent's, as Kieran finds the original art of Arcbound Ravager off that Ancient Stirrings. And we're going to scoop it up.
Not gonna work. You got the combo.
I've got the combo.
You have the combo.
Not gonna lie.
Yeah, interesting to see the kind of old school versus new school between Metallic Mimic and Steel Overseer. Also interesting that we did see Arcbound Worker from both players, so possibly we're misevaluating the card and it's better than we thought in the matchup, or maybe not enough cards to bring in to get rid of that card.
I'm curious what they boarded out. Be interesting to talk to the players after that and find out what we took out for spell skites on Eric's side of the table, at least, and we had those Nature's Claims on Kieran's side.
I don't even have to pay life for this.
Right. Net gain of 2. Play first.
Alright.
Looks like players keeping their decks pretty much the same going into game 3. What do you think about that, Travis? Do you habitually make sure to get out your sideboard before game 3 of a match?
If it matters, like if it would change my opponent's decisions on playing around a certain card, like perhaps they saw one of that I brought in that I might not want to be in my deck if I'm might not want to be in the deck if I'm on the play or draw, and yeah, I'll generally, if there's a reason, I'll put some cards in and take some out, or at least feign doing that. But if there's no reason to do that, it's just a waste of time.
But I guess if you have multiple disciples of the ball,
So these folks, there's nothing that you're really, like you're not going to side out your spell skites or your Nature's Claims. So there's no real gain to doing that.
I suppose. I guess you could find that if you're not as experienced in the matchup, not saying these players are, but if you aren't, you might find that a card that you thought would be all right in the matchup feels pretty bad, and maybe you're reevaluating things after that.
Oh, I thought you were just asking if you would sort of bluff changing things around.
I kind of was.
Okay, I'll keep.
I will also keep.
Looks like both players keeping on 7.
Nexus. Arcbound Worker.
So we get the Nexus into Worker for Kieran. Curious if we're going to see anyone with a turn 1 Hardened Scales.
Mox Opal. Ancient Stirrings.
Another game. The amount of chances we've had to see turn 1 Hardened Scales at this point, 6 chances for either player to have turn 1 Hardened Scales. Have yet to see it.
It feels like this deck might benefit, as most decks would, but because it's so different when you have that Hardened Scales and without it, with the new London Mulligan rule, if that is to be adopted in all formats.
I do wonder. It's interesting in that you think of kind of Standard Affinity as a bit of a critical mass deck, so that deck's definitely looking to just have a number of artifacts. But this deck, because it's a bit more of an engine deck, I think that you're right that it could probably do a little bit more with less.
And so we get a Metallic Mimic naming Construct here on Kieran's side, and a pass of the turn. You are playing a lot more, I think, chaff in Hardened Scales than you are in Affinity. So you can be down a couple cards and still get an engine going.
Right. I mean, I kind of think of all of Affinity as chaff, but, you know. Yeah, Affinity's kind of weird because your chaff is oftentimes what makes your other cards good. Like, Ravager needs to eat its chaff.
Passed it.
Got a Ballista on 1 and a pass of the turn.
And giving Kiernan a chance to play creatures into this, or with this Metallic Mimic in play. What are your thoughts on that, Travis?
I kind of like just trading the Ballista as a removal spell.
I think I feel similarly. This is a little surprising to me.
Huh.
And swing for 1. Good.
Really curious what the contents of both players' hands are.
Yeah.
Kind of informs a lot of the decisions you make on how to sequence your plays.
Steel Overseer. Pass.
Seems like if Kieran had a creature to play that was a construct, I might have just wanted to cast that to hopefully bait out your opponent using the Walking Ballista without having to waste a card targeting the Ballista and then having that then kill your creature.
Absolutely. I felt similarly that Eric would almost want to just trade off 1-for-1 without any need to prompt him. And I think that the gentler prompt, as you're saying, by just playing a creature out with the Mimic in play, seems like it would have been enough to get him to fire it off.
Yep. Eric with the Steel Overseer that is not summoning sick anymore, and Kieran with the Hardened skills. It's really interesting here.
And this is a terrifying moment for Kiernan because just the combination of these two cards can be enough to manage the board entirely.
Resolves.
He's good.
Okay. Because if you dismember, it'll still get the counter. Metalcraft online.
Looks like we do have a Dismember, at least in Eric's hand. It looks like a couple Hangerback Walkers.
Animate this.
Animates the Ink Moth.
Activate Steel Overseer.
And we're activating that Overseer. Gonna get some counters.
Response to the activation, maybe?
And Kiernan is responding to the activation. So if it is a removal spell, I would be a bit surprised that Kiernan... Okay. No response. It's scary in either case, but I definitely would have wanted to... I've learned the lesson a number of times with Steel Overseer that, well, it doesn't look that threatening. If you leave that thing on the board, you lose games a lot.
It's
Yeah, if it's still Overseer is able to get more than one activation.
Walking Ballista.
response, sir.
Okay.
Gonna have a Dismember on the Walking Ballista.
Hang your Arcbound Worker 1. And I'll hang you 1.
It does seem like the players are maybe valuing things differently than I would value them, and it's possible that's because I have no experience in this matchup. But I'm much more afraid of the Steel Overseer than almost anything else on the board.
I 100% agree with that.
A lot of counters.
In fact, if I had the Dismember, I would have been very tempted to just use it on my main phase if I had the mana for that before my opponent could untap with that Overseer.
Right. It looks like Eric has a couple Hangerback Walkers in hand as well. And it looks like he can just keep pumping up this Ink Moth Nexus. Might just be able to get there with Infect.
Attack for 3 infect.
Now, the thing I would have liked to see from Eric there is animating the Ink Moth, and then because you have Middlecraft, playing the Hangerback Walker so that when you activate your Steel Overseer, your Walker is going to get an
Even though
additional
I am
counter on it. It just feels like with this Hardened Scales deck, you really need to milk all the counters that you can out of any activations and just like be as efficient as possible with how you sequence your spells, because on face value, none of your spells are that powerful, but if you can get extra counters on them, you really need to do that.
Agree. And the mirror is all about tiny edges. Looks like Eric had Dismember in hand and is valuing getting Kiernan's threat off the board more so than pumping up a Hangerback Walker. That's a moment where I think I also might have waited if I were on Eric's side. I think the worker as a 3/3 maybe looks a little bit more threatening than I think it is. I might have waited for at least waited to see what Kiernan played on his turn, considering Dismember is an instant, and he might be able to evaluate things differently.
I agree. We're not. I don't think either of these decks are playing any protection spells or counter spell type effects. If Kiernan is able to find a sack outlet, those Thopters are going to be a bit of a road bump here.
Right, and Kiernan should be able to present a 2-turn clock here with the Inkmoth Nexus. Looks like we hit 7 infect, so yeah, Kiernan is definitely going to have to find a sack outlet or some way to deal with that Inkmoth.
Naming.
Pithing Needle, a very interesting card to bring in the mirror.
I'm curious what it's naming. It looks like Eric is thinking about it.
Ravager.
This is actually the sort of card I like naming Ravager, as that's kind of the card that's the sack outlet. It almost seems like the Needle would have been better on Kiernan's side, as Steel Overseer is a card that Eric's playing, but it doesn't look like Kiernan's playing.
Correct. But I just imagine a removal spell has to be better than Pithing Needle, regardless.
And so, oh, and Kiernan has the Ravager.
You want to do anything
No,
on the stack?
it resolves. It resolves.
And Ravager resolves here.
Okay, go ahead.
And with 2 Hardened Scales out and his own Inkmoth Nexus, Eric is going to have to be very, very careful here, because if he doesn't have a way to deal with Kiernan's Inkmoth Nexus, Kiernan could just go all in on his own turn and one-shot Eric.
It's interesting how this Hardened Scales deck can get really nuts if you just have some Hardened Scales and Arcbound Ravager plus any other creature, especially when you have Inkmoth with those infect kills.
Right. Doesn't feel like a lot of permanence, but especially with something like Hangerback Walker that just explodes into a bunch of little Thopters.
And we're going to be easily above 10 counters if Kiernan wanted to move on to that Inkmoth. So Kiernan could untap if Eric does not attack and add a counter to Hangerback, which would be 2 counters, sacrifice it to... Oh, but we're going to attack, so this point is moot.
Combat. Okay. One button.
So this is either Eric has something in hand,
To Arcbound Ravager, any
or he's just hoping that Kiernan is
Play.
willing to
Oh, Nature's Claim Archon Ravager.
okay. So
You'll get 3
this
flyers.
is on the stack.
Yeah.
building a stack here.
Okay. And I gain 4 life.
Pretty much.
So Kieran is going to gain 4 here, and we're going to have 3 flyers.
23. I took 4 from Dismember. So
Oh,
19. 3 factors, and obviously I'll use 1 to block.
And we're going to block with one of the Thopters.
Makes sense to me.
So once the dust settles, it does feel like Eric is in a good place here.
Hanger back walker.
Okay. Activate.
But again, it doesn't take much. The right draw on Kiernan's side with 2 hardened scales could make this Inkmoth lethal. He will need to find probably another sack outlet.
Yeah, if it is a I was gonna say if it was a Ravager, it wouldn't quite be lethal. You would be just a little short, but now with that Mox Opal, a Ravager might do it.
Right. And he's able to buy himself a bit of time here,
Well,
provided Eric can't find a walking ballista. He can keep blocking this Inkmoth.
And
it's gonna be harder and harder to assemble the win there when your Thopters are just chump blocking right now.
Block here. And I take the. What is it? 2? Or
I'll pump, so it'll be 3. And we go to 16. Alright, end my turn.
All right, passing back. See what Kiernan can find on the top. Probably a sequence of an additional hanger back into Ravager, I think, would probably be the best thing that you could do.
Agreed. Yeah, even Ballista, I think even with a couple of hardened scales out, it's not going to be big enough. The Steel Overseer has just gotten too far out of hand.
And Eric is also going to be able to threaten a fair amount of just regular damage.
Yeah, put the Vice on as far as damage from Infect and just standard damage where Kiernan's just going to have to eventually deal with it all. And
And Eric leaving back that Inkmoth Nexus, perhaps just in case of shenanigans on the other side of the table.
right, and deciding to actually attack with that Steel Overseer rather than pump.
Go 4.
I think Eric realizing that he just
End my
needs to close the game at this point and not give Kiernan the chance to string together anything.
I wasn't imagining any draw that Kiernan could have to get out of that one.
a little sad at that.
Yep. Eric runs away with it.
Holy crud.
I think
The only thing I can remember,
I certainly think that Steel Overseer,
like super
the decision to leave the Steel Overseer alive is probably a kind of turning point, critical point in this match.
Yeah, I can see wanting to kill the Ballista because it kills your creatures, but in the end, just the whole deck is built around synergies of getting counters on your creatures. So your opponent is going to have a bunch of creatures they're going to draw, and if you leave Steel Overseer on the field, it's going to get advantage when your opponent plays pretty much any card in the deck. So
Agreed.
that does look like Kieran brought in the Dismembers and Nature's Claims. Perhaps we'll get to see what they cited out. Pithing Needle was like, that's a strange one to me.
Yeah, that one was very surprising to me.
Oh, you didn't bring any pithing needles in the matchup?
I was following my guide.
So I was like,